if you were wondering. There used to be, I think it's still there, but somebody else owns it now. There used to be a store down by Costco on the south side of Red Deer. I know if I mentioned Costco, you'd all know where it is. It called Scott's Parables. I think it's called, somebody else owns it now, but it might still be there. It's a religious bookstore and gift store. And as you might expect, I believe it, at the time, it was owned by very conservative evangelicals. But I like to go in there because they always had something that I could find useful. Like they had some more liberal books. I wouldn't say progressive exactly, but they had some things and music and things that were a little bit more left of center. And so I appreciated either their openness to that or at least their marketing savvy. I was there once, and again, it's a while back, but I was there once, and I was looking for a particular children's book, and I went to the children's section, and on top of the bookcase was this box that said, "The Armour of God" on it. And it was a costume with a gold-colored breastplate and a shield, and it had a helmet and a sword. I didn't bother to see how much it was, because you can't really put a price on that, can you? But there it was, and I, of course, immediately took a picture of it and sent it to my daughter and said, "Your kids need this." She did not agree. But the second thing I thought was, when do you wear that? Do you randomly wear it on a Sunday morning or on a weekday to school? It was clearly designed for like an 8-year-old. Do you wear it for, do you get to be the Roman centurion in the Christmas play or the Easter play? That's not really fulfilling the whole potential of the armor of God thing, but still, it could be useful. I mean, Halloween, but conservative evangelicals, Halloween, maybe not. When would you wear it? It was a very literal representation of exactly what the author of Ephesians says, which is a little problematic, isn't it? I mean, if you're a follower of Jesus and you get a letter from somebody who starts talking about armor and something clearly militant, that doesn't really sound much like Jesus. So what's he mean? Personally, I think that the author of the letter to the Ephesians was talking about something he could see right away. He's in chains, right? So we might assume that he's perhaps imprisoned. What's he going to see? Well, he's going to see guards. He's going to see Roman soldiers. Anywhere in that part of the world at that time, you're only going to see Roman soldiers. And so, of course, we tend, and certainly in this costume that I saw in Parables, we tend to represent this armor of God as looking very Roman in style. Literally. And so he describes these things using this armor image. But does he really mean that in that sort of military way? Or perhaps is he meaning to subvert that image, to upend it, the same way Jesus would in telling parables, right? Quite often, when Jesus tells a parable, the surface obvious image isn't what it means. It's quite often exactly the opposite. Is he trying to do the same thing here? Is it like the beginning of the Gospel of Luke, where it says that a heavenly host announces to shepherds that Jesus is born, the Prince of Peace? Because host is Bible speak for a large army. An army of angels announces the Prince of Peace. Is he trying to do a similar thing there? Maybe. Even if he is, though, I guarantee you that the first people to read that letter or hear it are going to be very much like we are and go, "No, I think he means that literally." and they're going to hear it literally. There's a few issues with that, not the least of which is the military image. Jesus is clearly not a warrior in that sense. So why use it, if not to try and subvert that whole idea of Roman oppression? It has some other issues too, doesn't it? Armor is restrictive. It doesn't just protect you from the outside, it keeps you in. It can affect your movement. The helmet can affect your vision, your hearing. Make it harder for you to engage people. Somebody walks in your front door wearing armor, you have questions, and they're not particularly friendly ones necessarily. There might be other issues around the whole idea of wearing armor too. Other than it's militant, it's restrictive, it's controlling, it keeps you in, it disengages you from the world around you. It doesn't help you, let me say that differently, it doesn't help you engage the world around you. And what's Jesus all about? Engaging the world around you. There are issues with this image. Particularly if you then try and understand it in a different time than the people who first heard it. So we might be tempted then to try and find another way to express the armor of God. So let's bring that image of armor into the 21st. Oh, let's not. Because you know what we're going to get. We're going to get a military uniform, body armor, a helmet, and a gun. Don't need the shield anymore. How else then might we understand this image of putting on the armor of God? I have a couple of thoughts. Before I go there, I want to remind you of one other really important thing about putting on the armor of God, and that's what I just said. You put it on, which means you can take it off. In fact, if you're wearing the armor that the author of Ephesians describes, you don't want to be wearing that all the time. So you put it on, you take it off, you put it on, you take it off. You only put it on when it's absolutely necessary. Is that a really good image for all of the things that are described in that armor of God? Particularly given that we are created in the image of God, and God is within us. And Jesus is trying to teach us that the divine is in everything, in us too, and trying to reconnect us with that divine spark that is in us. So you put it on, you take it off. What if you kept it on all the time? What if you didn't have to worry about it being on or off? You simply knew it was there, because that's kind of the point of Jesus. So here's a couple of thoughts about that. When they were much younger, my grandkids really loved Bob the Builder. If you're familiar with Bob the Builder, if you're not familiar with Bob the Builder, you ought to be. Whether you're a parent or a grandparent, you should know Bob the Builder. And not the Americanized CGI cartoon version that's going around now, but the first version, the English version that was that really cool stop action animation. Bob the Builder was exactly what that sounds like. He was a character named Bob who built stuff. So, Jesus. And Bob had a helmet, a hard hat like you would. He wore overalls, and he had a tool belt. And he had a signature phrase, which was, "Can we fix it?" And everyone would say, "Yes, we can." Oh, some people who know Bob the Builder, yay. Okay. Everyone would say, "Yes, we can," and then they'd get to doing it. And the thing about Bob the Builder, the point of Bob the Builder, was to teach children about things like working together, helping others, cooperation. That when you encounter something that's difficult or a problem, you don't walk away from it. You engage it and you try and figure it out. You fix it because, yes, we can. Okay, awesome. That's what Bob's all about. And in order to do that, of course, he's got what? He's got a tool belt. He's got the overalls to protect him and everything, and the hard hat. That's good protection. But he's got a tool belt. And of course, as I'm sure everyone knows, he knows large pieces of equipment like earth movers and trucks and things because they have personalities too. It's a cartoon. But he has the tools to do it. And if he doesn't, he finds them. Again, clearly Bob is Jesus. Because that's what Jesus is about. Teaching us that we have the tools to engage things and to work them out. And just to make it absolutely clear that Bob is clearly Jesus, we often think of Jesus as being a carpenter, but in the earliest texts of Scripture that we have, the word that describes that isn't actually just a carpenter, it's a builder. It's someone who not just works with wood, but actually builds things. So Jesus is more likely a general contractor, if indeed he did follow in his father's footsteps. Just like Bob. And that's the point of Bob. He works with people, he engages people, he helps people find their way, and he's got the tools to do it, and he shares those. How about that as an image for the armor of God? Overalls, a hard hat, and a tool belt. Still something you put on and take off, isn't it? So let's envision the future for a moment. By the way, there's clearly, obviously, too many pop culture references in today's message, so you might want to look some of them up. I know we're all Star Trek fans because I keep mentioning Star Trek and you keep looking at me blankly. But I'm going to mention Star Trek again because there's no way you could not have heard of Star Trek. And one of the ways that you might have heard of Star Trek is that the ship is called the Enterprise. Right? And we're familiar. There have been shuttles and ships and things called Enterprise. One of the things about the Enterprise is that it has shields. Right? And the shields are not the kind of armor we would regularly recognize today, like on a tank or a battleship or things like that. Its shields are energy that's generated by the ship that encompasses the whole ship, that protects it. Clearly, they can fire through it, their own weapons through it, but other weapons can't get through the shields. So that's the point of the shields. But they're not like a solid mass. They're energy. In later episodes, we find out in series that they can actually extend the shields over other ships that are close by. You can see through it. You can engage through it. It's generated from within the ship. How about that? Because truly, the armor of God is God's presence within us. We generate that armor ourselves. We don't just put it on and take it off. We might make choices that go that way and seem like we've let go or distanced ourselves from it. But that's Jesus, again, teaching us to come back to it, to re-engage it, to find that divine spark that's in us and use it like our tool belt. To also remember that God's presence is protective. but allows for us to engage the world around us. I got one more. It's not a pop culture reference. What does it feel like when you're at home? Do you feel safe at home? Tricky question to ask these days, isn't it? If you feel safe in your own home. But instead of thinking of the structure, go beyond the idea of the structure, not just the house, but what it feels like to feel like you're at home. When people talk about their home church, for instance, what are they describing? What's the feeling they're describing? When you talk about your hometown, what's the feeling you're describing? When you talk about your home, it's not just that feeling of comfort, of safety. It's a feeling of belonging. It's a feeling of connection. It's the place from which you can go out and return. How is God not our home? We wander from God sometimes. Jesus calls us back. But that sense of connectedness, that sense of finding the divine within us, that sense of being able to share that sense with others, that's not just comfort, it's not just protection, it's not just inspiration, it's more than that. That's the armor of God. That's the love of Jesus. That's the power of the Spirit. It's all of those things that we try so hard, just like the author of the letter to Ephesians, we try so hard to come up with imagery, with metaphors, with ways of describing something which is practically indescribable. Which is one of the reasons why it's often so hard for us to find it. But we have help. We have stories about Jesus, about the life of Jesus, that teach us how God is present in our lives, how the Spirit inspires us, how we are capable of living those things out too, of finding that connection within us to God. And God is in all things, and so there's a connection to all things too. For some people, the image of the armor of God, as the author to Ephesians describes it, perhaps that works for you. For others, they might wonder about those questions about it being very military, about it being warlike, about it being claustrophobic even, about it being something that disconnects you rather than connects you. There are some people who might think a better way of describing that is the tools that Jesus gives us to live. Or perhaps a way the Spirit of God envelops us and not only inspires us but protects us. Perhaps it's like feeling like we're at home. The point is, however you choose to try and describe it, it's very hard to find a way to describe it that's complete, isn't it? So there are moments when it feels like each of those things are necessary. Which is another interesting thing about Jesus. Jesus tries to engage people and connect with people where they're at. That's why we've got parables. That's why we've got stories of Jesus meeting with all sorts of different kinds of people. And yes, sometimes the story just sounds like Jesus walked in, smacked him on the head and said, "You're healed," and walked away. But that's not what happened. Jesus stopped and talked with them and engaged them and found a way to connect. In all of the diversity of the people that Jesus met, in all of the diversity of the world in which Jesus lived and the world in which we live, Jesus found a way to connect with people. Whichever image works for you, perhaps at different images in different moments, the point is, God is in you, and God is the way that we connect with each other. And when you walk away from that, or ignore it, you are taking the armor off. You're dropping the tool belt. You're dropping the shields. You're letting go of it. And Jesus calls us to embrace it, to carry it with us all, to remember that it is in us always.